All right. Welcome to Distilled Security Podcast, Episode 2. My name's Justin Leapline. I'm here with Joe Wynn and Rick Yoakum. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe up to our podcast where we do a monthly podcast for everyone. Today we got a good lineup here. We're going to be talking a little bit about frameworks, how to implement it, a little bit of AI because it's popular and everything, and a few other topics that are of interest. And we're going to be reviewing the bourbon that we have today. So first thing I wanted to start off with, I think is of interest to all of us and everything, is frameworks. A lot of conversations about frameworks, how it's implemented into organizations. People like to pick one and say, is this the best one for me and everything? So curious to get what your guys' thoughts on this. Joe, I know you had something recently with this. You want to start us off?
Yeah, the conversation I had, it was actually just today, was about picking the right KPIs in order to drive the security program forward in the business. And while that was the part of the topic, it was also, the framework they wanted to align to, NIST CSF. And because the 6 functions is something that could keep everybody's attention. But if they start going into like ISO or all the other things, they start to lose focus. So they want to keep the NIST. Now, the idea
they
was...
like the nice clean buckets and everything.
They do.
It kind of works. Respond, recover.
and one of the questions was, well, while you're using this, where do you find like the right kind of KPIs to drive the measurement of this so you can keep everything moving forward?
Right.
And the thing is, NIST CSF wasn't built as an assessment tool, nor was it built with like deliberate KPIs. And so the conversation went on for a bit, and we finally got to other things you can use. So you can reverse engineer some of the other NIST guidance where it gives examples of what's going on, and that might help. But also like CIS. CIS is out with version 8 now, but they haven't published their metrics, but they have a CIS 7 has a metrics file that you can open in Excel and in PDF. And in it gives you a lot of different ways to go about measuring at different target levels.
Right.
And so the nice thing with NIST CSF is it has the informative references. You can connect it to the CIS and then connect it to the parts that you want to use. And so long way about getting a way to use KPIs from other sources if you're doing that. So that's the example I had from the day.
Yeah. Gotcha. So when you're doing that, you're essentially profiling. Like CSF has a profiling component to it as well, where you're doing that. But that's essentially what you're doing with CIS is profiling, see where you're hitting and what controls. And CIS has that tiering as well, with that, which CSF does not. So
yeah, they have the 1 to 4
tier 1,
scale.
1 to 3
CSF.
CSF has the CIS.
CIS has one implementation.
This episode
groups.
is going to be acronym deep here.
CIS has like one implementation groups 1, 2, and 3.
Right.
I believe CSF comes built in with like 4 scores.
4 tiers.
Right. Yeah.
And those are more target levels, and they're also very confusing because you got to read the document closely.
Yeah.
What they did nicely in the latest CSF that they didn't do in 1.1 is they wrote these like quick start guides, and they give a lot of detail written in a whole lot easier to read language.
Yeah.
So that you don't have to be a data scientist to understand it.
CIS has some really good ones too. And they have ones for like mobile, they have ones for cloud, they have like very specific, beyond just like the configuration baseline stuff, they actually have governance type guidance associated with the controls, which can be super helpful if you're in a specific niche or trying to figure something out.
So which one should I pick? Tongue in cheek.
No, that's great. And what I always like to do is say, well, why don't you use your controls and pick whichever control framework works best for you in order to manage the risk that you got. Now, how do you get to that point? Well, I always go back to, and I'll probably repeat this because I keep going back to ISO's methodology as one of my favorites, because it starts with who cares, your interested parties, and then you go on to what are your assets in the scope that they care about. And now let's take those assets into a risk assessment and let's apply controls. And what controls do you apply? Well, you could pick the ISO controls, but you don't have to.
27,000, right?
27,001 and Annex A controls, or you could pick controls from 853 or any of the other 800 groups or CIS. But what you can then the next thing you do is you memorialize those control decisions inside your policies, and then from there you start measuring the effectiveness of your policies. And that's how we loop back around to the best ways to figure out the right KPIs to use, the ones that handle the policy enforcement the best.
Right.
But once you decide on that, are you stuck with that framework then? Some tongue in cheek.
Yeah. What do you think?
So I just had a call actually today with this, and I was talking to the customer. And if you're anywhere near approaching like a maturity level, you're going to be having multiple interest groups, outside and potentially inside, for this. So privacy, compliance, regulatory, contractual compliance, whatever it may be, you're quickly going to get out of a contained framework, with that. And as you mentioned, there's advantages to, ISO 27000 where it's more process focused, make sure you have the continual engine running, whereas a lot of other ones are control focused, with that. So that gives you an advantage looking at the program holistically and continue to evaluate it, which they have controls that address that in other ones, but it's not as formalized, into that perspective. But ISO is very heavy on documentation, and to plus or minus, do you need all that documentation?
Not unless you're getting audited.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, if you're getting a certification.
So, there's pros and cons to that, but I usually recommend, if I was designed from scratch, come up with a base of ISO and then blend your own controls into that, because there are going to be a lot of interest groups into that. And I was actually, one of the things I commonly point to is like UCF, the Unified Compliance Framework. They're the paid for blending of everything, all the laws. That's obviously costs some money, but SCF, the Security Controls Framework, is a free version of that. And it's often a great start for people. Like if you need multiple authoritative sources from an interest, I'll basically filter on, tell me what you need to comply with. This, privacy, this. Okay, let's sort it down to what that control base is, and then we can utilize that to upload it into a GRC tool. And there's your start. And you already got the blending. And for future, you can just add it, and maybe you have 95% of the controls already there, and here's 10 more controls that you're missing because Australia, popped up something, or something like that.
Well, and I love that point, because it's actually one of the things that I see people get wrong all the time. It's like they take a controls framework and then they're afraid to touch it, right? It's like they're afraid to modify a control or shift a control or remove a control, right? Yep. They'd but they don't even think about it. They think it's this immutable thing. Where it's like, well, no, if you're never going to do that control, and there's no risk to not doing the control, or you've mitigated it some other way, just get rid of it. You don't need to give yourself a failing grade every time. You need to memorialize it, to your point, have some document somewhere that says why you're not doing it, right? Yeah. The same way that you want some documents that say stuff that you're adding or stuff that you're changing. But like, I think a lot of people, even that are high up decision makers in organizations, right? They see, oh, well, this is the CSF, so we're going to audit to the CSF or win a third-party assessment of the CSF, where frankly, it would probably be more effective oftentimes if they were like, well, we took the CSF, we made these changes to it, can you review us against this set that we've made our own, right? And along the way, if review our design decisions in terms of how we've adjusted the controls framework as well. And if you think we've made a poor choice in terms of modifying a control or we're missing something, like, yeah, give us opinions on that too. But people, a lot of organizations that I talk to have this really strong reluctance to modify a control framework. And honestly, they should. It would make things so much better. And to your point, like, unify a control set amongst multiple groups. Now you have a lot more interest and a lot more potential resources going after making this thing right.
Right. But the thing they're worried about is the mapping component of it. I think a lot of the times they're like, how am I going to pick CSF and comply with PCI? Because CSF says in one control, do baselines. And it's like, and PCI is like, you need NTP, you need logging, you need this, type of thing, which could all wrap into one control in NIST,
Right.
So
well, I think that's part of it. I think the other thing that I see a cause of the reluctance is like, oh, but if something goes wrong, now someone's going to be testifying to someone else in terms of like why we didn't do the control that would have stopped this. And like when you're explaining, you're losing. But I think to a large extent, people's programs are going to be much more effective if they tailor the stuff in a meaningful way. And if they do the diligence up front, the design diligence, and they do just a little bit of memorialization and documentation to say, look, this is a starting point. We used CSF or ISO or the combination of things as a starting point. We've moved it just slightly to here because this is what aligns with us. They're going to be much more situated to have a good security program. But then also, like, if things really do go sideways at some point, and as they often do on a long enough time frame, they're going to be in a place to defend that really well because they will say, hey, look, we thought about our risks. We actually tailored our framework to align to our risks. We actually had a third-party opinion that says that we did a pretty good job at that, and they made some additional adjustments. Like that actually,
or I think not, we corrected it, or something like that.
I actually think that puts you in a much stronger situation if you need to like explain to some regulator or something, why you're doing something. He's like, well, because we thought about the risks and we aligned it, as opposed to, no, we just did the baseline starting point thing forever and we never touched it.
You hit on like two really good things I think are worth repeating. One is the purpose of the CSF is to make sure that you're considering all of these areas, all of these functions and the categories and the subcategories.
Yep.
And then the other good point you made is how do you justify your decisions through a risk assessment? And once you figure out your risks, it's justifying why you did pick something, but also why you didn't pick something.
Right.
And if you can go back and say we did that for this reason, and it was justifiable, your defensibility is gonna go a whole lot further.
Yeah, way up. And update that once every couple years or once every year or whatever, right? So it's not, we made this decision 10 years ago, never thought about it again.
Yeah,
but
that won't work.
Yeah, right. But no, if that is like a part of your, you just have a schedule. Hey, we're gonna think about this annually or whatever.
Yep. And you put that in your policy and your standards.
Yeah,
and now you're following that too.
Yeah.
So something you said that I think if everybody's not familiar with that, might be useful to see the framework, the one that you mentioned, not the
SCF, Security Controls Framework.
And can you go into that one and also select and filter on the various areas? Just
so
like you can
it's a big Excel sheet, and they have essentially on column based, they have all the different authoritative controls, and then in those columns, if it's blank, there's nothing mapped. If there's something in there, they reference the actual control out of that standard.
Right.
So essentially, you have to filter on like what's in this column, like non-blank and non-blank and non-blank, and then you essentially have your control on the very left, like all the controls are lined up in the rows, into that. So that's how I end up filtering it. It's not like, just give me this, and this. Like UCF, you can just say, give me these five standards, type of thing. There's some Excel filtering magic, and then you delete everything else, and then you're left with that. Yeah. And then you clean up, like, obviously a whole bunch of, like, when I upload it into a GRC tool, you have to delete, like, 100 columns. They just span, columns. In fact, we were talking about, they also have threats and risk mapped to each one of their controls as well. And they do it kind of funky where they actually have the risk into here. And if it repeats its own name in the thing, like it just repeats all the risk in the columns. And if it fills its own name in, it maps to that control and everything. So it's a little weird, but you can get there.
But if you figure it out, you don't have to spend the money on the compliance framework.
And the nice thing about it, like we talked about, like when you upgrade it and everything, a lot of people have a hard time, like I'm on CSF 1.1 and 2.0 is out now, or PCI 3.2.1 and now 4.0 is out. The nice thing about this is once they have it mapped, you basically say, okay, I want to go to this, and then you can see whether it's the same controls or different, or, like it will add more controls, into that, typically if you're adjusting to that. Yeah. And so you're not adjusting your base. Like a lot of times if they're doing a whole bunch of remapping, and PCI, adds controls at the beginning, which shifts the numbers all around and everything. Like that's not a thing. It's these controls we're mapping to, and by the way, they map to this authoritative sources,
Right. And the authoritative source, so for example, maybe it's 853, and when you're doing control selection, have you ever selected controls from the NIST CSF, or are you using that to get yourself to an 853 control that is actually a control statement?
No, they're all, so they have like UCF, they have all their own controls that they basically have.
They built like a hub that sits in the middle and it maps to all the individual
so they have
frameworks.
their own written controls, just like the common control, CCF, common control framework for UCF. So they have basically their own base, and that's what they map everything to. So that base is what you're pivoting off of. So it's not necessarily like PCI maps to this. Everything's mapping back to that, and that is mapping out to everything.
And so if you're struggling for how to write a control statement, they've written them in a way that's not duplicative of the other frameworks.
Exactly.
You can use
That's a good
these,
point.
and then you can justify the use through the mapping.
Yep.
Yeah, and pick them, and if there's something that's not in there that you want, make it your own by adding it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff. And, you know, it takes a little bit of expertise to do some of the stuff. Like, there's controls maybe around AI. Like, that's kind of a, you know, there's papers being generated like that, but it's pretty unknown for most people. Like, you can add your own. You know, if you're adopting something into organization, you can add controls right into that. You know, map it back into policy. I'm a proponent of not having an AI policy, but it's more third-party, vendors, and data management, which should already be a base. It's just different, type of thing. But, however you want to do that and reflect it, to what your control base is. So,
yeah.
No, that's a great overview for tailoring. So what's the main takeaway?
Stop not tailoring frameworks.
Stop not tailoring.
what if you're really simple, though?
What if you're really simple?
So you have a small organization that might be a corner store, restaurant, and all you care about is PCI.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. Like
I'd argue you should still.
They probably don't care about PCI at that point.
Well, but I would say still take a swing at tailoring it because there's probably a bunch of stuff in a framework. They're built to be utilized by
everybody,
as many people, as many organizations as possible.
Yep.
So there's inherently going to be stuff that probably doesn't apply to a small mom and pop shop or whatever. And so again, you walk through it, make sure you're not forgetting anything. Carve out the stuff that doesn't apply anymore, and you don't really need to assess against that.
Now, can you tailor PCI, or aren't you supposed to do all the things?
You're supposed to do, well, I mean, there's not applicable controls into that. So.
Ask your QSA.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, like any other framework, it has its own interests, and you can carve off segmentation. I mean, the bad thing about authoritative sources like that is it has a very specific interest point, just like HIPAA. It only cares about one type of data, and it doesn't apply to your holistic program, into that. So yeah, it could have all the controls, but one system's in scope. So like your rest of your environment could be not patched for, 10 years. And they're like, okay, that's fine.
Well, and this is where that Venn diagram of like security and compliance comes into play, right? Like if you're trying to be secure, absolutely tailor your maturity framework. If you're trying to be compliant and there is a compliance framework you need to adhere to, you're probably going to have to do all those things, or at least follow their guidance to tailoring accordingly.
Yep.
So I guess just keep that in mind as you go.
Yeah. So yeah, it's when I run people through kind of my little process of doing the SEF, they're like, "Oh, that makes a lot of sense. Like, it's pretty easy, like to do this. You don't have to worry about the mapping. It's the price is right, type of thing." So,
time.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of time, but less time than mapping multiple, disparate frameworks together. Like that takes time.
Well, it's kind of like any other investment too. You sort of do it up front and then it'll pay dividends as you go, as opposed to not doing it up front. Now you're assessing against a bunch of stuff that doesn't necessarily make sense and maybe missing a couple things that should make sense and, talking about all that in the back end. So, yeah.
And if you have a good GRC tool that also kind of compounds this, like you can then start reporting on different aspects and business units and sources of that type of thing, which then really helps.
A good GRC tool like a Pisky.
Yeah, I'm like that. If I ever get it out.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Cool. So, well, what do you think about giving some shout outs to some upcoming conferences?
Sure.
Yeah. So the first one coming up, and a couple of us are helping to organize it. B-Sides Pittsburgh, July 12th, Rivers Casino. Tickets still available. You may not get guaranteed a T-shirt at this point because they were sent off for ordering.
Blinky badge is still available too.
Oh, good. Yep.
It's less than a month, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's coming up.
Yeah.
Exciting. And then, and I think there's still a couple sponsorship slots if anybody's interested.
Yeah.
And then another one is TRIS, the Three Rivers Information Security Symposium.
I'm surprised you
I always
you just looked it up, didn't you?
I always want to say summit, and I always get it wrong, and I feel bad.
Exactly, and that's coming up on October 3rd. But Justin, you just had mentioned they just opened their call for
call for papers, presentations, and everything. So
submit.
yeah, they're a good conference and around. Have you guys noticed, like, I've been getting an onslaught of random security conference around Pittsburgh.
We've seen a couple.
There's some
come
good
through.
moneymakers out there, moneymakers for people who throw them.
Yeah.
Because of that, and there's some things coming up. So I don't want to mention the for-profit ones. The ones we're talking about are the ones that don't really keep any of the money for themselves.
Yeah, and they're
Right.
community driven.
Yeah.
Like we know
Yeah,
basically all the, I mean, you guys are on the, obviously the B-sides, organizing group, but we know all the, essentially the organizers of TRIS.
as well, right?
And everything. So, so it's community driven, which is great, into that. I just, the last, month or so, I'm beginning these, like, I've been going to every conference in Pittsburgh, since 15, 20 years, it feels like. And now it's like, where is this conference coming from?
Yeah.
There's a
It's
couple,
new one.
couple new ones.
Yeah.
See how they turn out. Maybe there'll be something there.
So hopefully we'll see you there, and hopefully see everybody there.
yeah.
So, this
On to the booze.
Scotch is making me thirsty. No, I'm kidding. The Kramer thing. So this is
Bourbon.
really good. Yeah, I know. I was kidding. It was a Seinfeld reference.
I missed it.
Or pretzels. And then,
Yeah.
So this is really good. This is Door Knockers. You said this was, what was it, Thief?
Whiskey Thief.
Whiskey Thief.
Distilling.
And
And read it
Bardstown,
closely. I
you
think
said?
Whiskey Thief actually puts this together for them. Is the way it
Oh, but there
reads.
are a couple guys. I think that's true.
Distilled, matured, and bottled by Whiskey Thief Distilling Company. Frankfurt, Kentucky.
Frankfurt. That's it.
And so, tasting it, it's really good. The color is
Super dark.
great. And it kind of has a caramel, very caramely right at the front there. And then it settles into kind of like a nice, like, sweet vanilla
Yeah.
Yeah,
with
we
a
were picking
touch
up
of
vanilla
spice.
earlier.
Vanilla, little
You know, kind of
tobacco, little like leathers and tobaccos. Like
What's the
usual, but
proof
yeah.
on this?
It's high. It's way smoother.
109.
It's way smoother than it should be.
Yeah, I
for-
thought it was going to bite a whole lot more.
Yeah.
Hey,
Cheers, guys.
Cheers. Yeah. Thanks for bringing this, Rick.
Yeah, of course.
And you weren't able to get this in PA, right? This is not PA.
No, this was something that I have no idea how it made it to my house from Louisville.
Yeah. Just showed up.
Just showed up one day.
just like I do
He's
to
like,
all
come
my,
on, little buddy.
I don't know what. I don't know what.
all my customers during an audit, I'm like, stop talking.
Yeah. I can either confirm nor deny that I brought this bottle of booze.
I got a funny story. So we were doing an audit at a company I used to work with. I won't name it and everything, but we had a regulator in, and I gave this big spiel to like 50 people were involved with this. And one of the things I said, I was like, hey, with this, answer their questions. I want you to answer questions truthfully, but then stop, type of thing. I was like, I don't want you to expand on it. If there's dead silence, let it ride.
Let it go. Yep.
They are going to be the ones driving the question. So just answer the question and then be done and let them as a follow-up. So there was this one gentleman, we were doing, I think it was identity access management with this. And we were talking about like on the Windows side, what do they do and everything like that. And the auditor asked, he's like, and is this the same side on the Linux side? And he's like, yes.
Crickets.
I just stopped.
Normally, silence is the auditor's friend because somebody will keep talking.
Well, it's a
and
tool
it was
for sure.
hilarious. And this is like dead silence for like 10 seconds. Like 10 seconds of dead silence, like an
Oh, it
eternity.
feels like forever.
And then the auditor just like, okay. Moved on.
It's
It
one
was hilarious.
well done.
That's good. The silence being the auditor's friend thing, it's funny. I remember like the Deloitte 101 training. Like that was a thing that they told you to do. It's like, yeah, sometimes just if you ask a question and you feel like there might be some additional detail you didn't get, just stop talking and just see what they say. Don't be the next one to speak. It's interesting.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a tool that's used.
Yeah. it was hilarious. We talked about it afterwards. It was just one of those.
So the
things.
takeaway there is make sure whoever is helping you get audit ready teaches you when to and when not to continue to answer questions.
Yeah. I heard a thing from a highly mature organization I was working with on a couple things, and they were talking about their process when they get audited by some known to be extremely thorough regulatory individuals. And they said, the approach they take is essentially the experts in the room never answer a question until it has been restated by general counsel. So if the resources are there to have this, if you're at a large organization, I thought it was a very clever way of doing it because...
Did the lawyers make up this rule?
Well,
they get paid by the hour.
Well, it's internal. They're internal, okay. So they're getting paid anyway. But basically, so then the lawyer can clarify the question as much as they want or not want, with the regulator, and then they'll restate the question. And then once they rephrase the question, then the subject matter expert answers it. And then anything outside. So I just thought it was a very clever way. What's that?
Was this for any audit?
It's how they manage specific regulatory audits that they go through.
Interesting.
Without trying to give up too much.
Yeah.
But yeah, I thought it was actually a very clever way of doing it. If you have internal counsel, and they have a fairly mature organization where their counsel is involved in these audits by default anyway.
Okay.
So it was a really interesting thing to see. That was the give and take that they do. I thought it was kind of smart.
Yeah. That's interesting.
Yeah. Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
That's an expensive
audit.
This.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is.
Well,
but it also allows them to continue doing business. So.
Right. Not having that regulator let them keep doing business is more expensive.
Right. For sure.
All right. Next topic here that I want to dive into is AI and security. So AI is very popular. We're plugging it here, so just we get the clicks and everything. But really curious on, with the adoption of AI, have you seen any tooling that you use from a security perspective? Where do you think the most advantages coming from a AI perspective, into that? Any general thoughts?
So I have yet to see a tool, like an actual security tool, that has convinced me that they are using legitimate artificial intelligence. That's something more than like a typical expert system.
Okay.
Right? And maybe they're out there, but I just haven't seen much that either it hasn't impressed me that much, or they're not really using it in the right way. Honestly, what I see like the most use from a real AI perspective is like help writing governance documents and stuff like that. I mean, no, to be perfectly honest, like there's a bunch of tedium that goes into that, or like summarizing complex topics and stuff like that. I mean, that stuff is super useful. Like help prepare me for a board intro. Like there are LLMs that like can do like intro to a specific topic or something, right? Like type into ChatGPT, how would you explain artificial intelligence in security to a board of directors? And it's probably going to give you some usable, stuff that's usable, right? That'll help shortcut your thinking. And almost like we were talking about with frameworks earlier, help make sure that you're not forgetting something that could be kind of obvious, but to augment your thinking on that. That's frankly what I've seen the most legit tactical benefits from.
So how many policies do you think nowadays is just generated by AI?
That's the other side. Stop not tailoring your AI policies is going to be a year from now topic.
Stop not editing them after AI generated because it's probably wrong.
Right. Or, well, into your point, like how many emails? I have, again, we'll change the names to protect the innocent. There's one of my friends in an IT role was working with the security guy, and he was telling me for about the last year, I think every question he gets, I think he just plugs it into ChatGPT and responds. and I think ultimately there was some screenshot evidence that sort of backed up that assumption at some point. So,
do you guys watch South Park at all? I don't watch it regularly, but I saw the clip where what was it? Stan was asking Clyde, like, how are you, so good with your girlfriend and everything? He's like, anytime she texts me something, I just type it into Chat GPT for appropriate response and just spits it back out to her. it's like, what do you think? Do you think I'm ugly or something? She's like, no, you're the most beautiful, blah, 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 blah. And it's like, oh, you're so kind.
Yeah. Well, but so I feel like everyone in the comments should scream and yell at me about tools that actually use AI that are good for security, because I'd love to be educated on that. But from my perspective, I haven't seen anything that's been like just really wowed me. But have you seen?
Well, I haven't either, but how is it going to, and what I'm looking to learn is how are people actually really saving time in their jobs from a security perspective? And of course, on the governance side, you have that. Well, what about the technical side? What about on the watching the logs and responding to potential incidents?
Yeah, well, and I think that the challenge is, and we talk about, false positive rate and false negative rate in security all the time, right? Like the challenge is the false negative rate and the false positive rate when you're using like AI to like change firewall rules automatically, or to like, kick off an incident investigation or things like that. Like, it's super expensive when it gets it wrong. And I think there's a lot of feel associated with that I just don't know. Maybe it'll get there. I have a tough time seeing how it works.
I don't see anything yet from an AI perspective taking essentially control of decision making. It's more information augmentation, just basically providing context or aligning things to bring attention to.
Yeah, to be considered.
Yeah, exactly.
Not even to
like
be the
you
final
mentioned,
decision.
like changing stuff. I'm not aware of that.
Well,
there's some access controls.
It's in like the hype cycles for like zero trust, and like there's like Gartner stuff about like what data security posture management. And it talks about like, oh yeah, we're gonna your access, from an access perspective, yeah, we'll automatically like, ramp up or ramp down file access based on whatever. But at the heart of it, the things that I see that actually work and that are implemented are typically like rules that people consider and then put into place.
Right.
And using AI to be like, hey, what should I be considering? I think that's super fair to bring things that exceed normal benchmarks to humans' attentions for investigation. I think that's great. But yeah, I haven't seen much that has really been like, oh yeah, this is going to save an engineer or a technician, tons and tons and tons of time.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, whenever I think of security, the other piece I bring up, but I don't want to dive away from security if you have something else, but I want to maybe hit on privacy for a moment.
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and one of the things I was watching or listening to the Hustle Daily Show podcast the other day, and in it they brought up this toy that I haven't heard about called Moxie. So I looked it up. Moxie is this little robot about so big, costs a little under $800, or I just found out today you can rent it for $99 a month if you want to try it. And they even have a refurbished for a discount out there now. But some of the main points that they brought up, and I didn't validate this stuff, I just took it from the Hustle Daily Show podcast, is that they say they don't share information and they don't store information, yet they're sending information back in order to be processed. They got to be doing something with it. But the part that really made me like iffy on the whole thing is they don't really have a feature for parents to know what conversations the kids are having with it, and more importantly, how it's answering.
Right.
And that would be something important to me from a privacy perspective.
Then they would have to send it back.
They would have to if they were doing that, but they're not. There's no way for a parent.
Yeah, there's not like parental controls on this toy potentially.
What this toy is telling you. So imagine the security implication if somebody were to compromise the system and then start having it answer in appropriate ways to
your baby monitor scenario all over again.
Right. Yeah. Well, to your point, or even if the way that the like language model that it was programmed on runs counter to something that you and your household believes or holds dear or whatever, right? Like, and it could be, it could be a religion thing, it could be a political thing, it could be a million different things. Yeah. Not having control. It's funny, I was thinking about this a little bit because I also looked at that, looked up that toy once we were talking about, hey, let's talk about AI and stuff. And one of the things that popped into my head though, which is a bit of a devil's advocate argument, because I am made very uneasy by the nature of this toy for a bunch, that's just naturally, and I haven't thought about all the reasons why yet. But the devil's advocate argument might be something along the lines of, okay, but if your kids are online anyway, they're subject to all these potential influences, right? They're subject to conversations in school that are unregulated potentially and all these things. And so I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of cross-checking my thinking a little bit, but I am also made very uneasy by this toy.
Yeah, well, I get a sense that the toy is maybe for targeting children a bit younger than children that are older. So I'm not quite sure what the age range is.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, but it says like, oh yeah, and then they can talk about their feelings and they can like interpret their drawings. And right, there's just, look, I think there's probably a lot of things that are well-intentioned, but like many things, the execution is, is critical. So yeah, I'm made very uneasy. And I also just wonder about like, even if they say they're not collecting data and stuff like that, I mean, we're security people, we're trust but verify type people.
Right.
So like, boy, oh boy, is this a landmine of marketing data in the future by being like basically a child's trusted journal robot.
Yeah,
that's wild.
How many times has the FTC come out and actually sued somebody for violating their own privacy policy?
Right. Yeah, actually.
Going against consumer interests and all that stuff and everything. A lot.
And we're going to charge them a ton of money. However, after the lawyers take their share, and after this and after that, the people that actually felt the impact get privacy monitoring for a year or whatever. I mean, whatever it is, right?
Well, what about all the cell phone companies and everything? Right. They were selling all that data out to third parties, and the third parties were selling that data again to other third parties and all that stuff. And they finally like nixed that after a little bit of government intervention. But it was like, you can do what to what? Like there was that one website that was disclosed that essentially you could just go to it, no authentication, type anybody's number in and see where their location is. It was like, that's creepy.
I was thinking about this today. I don't want to veer too far from AI, but we'll go where the conversation takes us to a point. I was thinking about this earlier today too. At what point have we had so many data breaches and privacy breaches that instead of like that you just say, look, everyone in America or everyone in the world or whatever gets free privacy monitoring. Like just no more like lawsuits about it, just like subsidize the whole thing at some point because everyone has it anyway.
Yeah, but I mean, does that actually do anything at the end of the day?
I don't know that it actually does.
I pay for it,
but I guess my point is, what I was really thinking about was based on the large scale breaches that have occurred in the past, I'd be interested in the percentage of humans in the US that have been impacted by some security or privacy breach.
Oh, over 90%, I'm sure.
And if that's the case, how much of the legal system or whatever is being taken up by all this stuff that's just giving them, where the benefit is another set of privacy monitoring on top of the 3 that they've already chosen to use or not use. Like at some point, I get that there needs to be like a stick, but like I'd almost rather just be like, okay, everybody in the US gets privacy monitoring for free. And from here on out, all fines that are levied to organizations are just going to go to something else. I don't know. It's just, but again, it depends on a million factors. But it's just, I was just curious about, like, I wonder how many humans in the US, like if you deduplicated the populations, have actually been impacted at this point. Because I bet it's a lot.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a lot. I mean, just to change healthcare, was what? A quarter of all Americans, was involved in that one alone.
Yeah, I think the number is actually higher, but I'm not sure.
It might be.
Yeah, it's bonkers.
So yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. So one thing before we get off this topic, from an AI perspective, I've been seeing some GRC tools implement some stuff like this. So there was one from a vendor questionnaire perspective that they integrated AI to basically look over some of their context of their governance and then help them craft answers for a question that they would upload, and everything like that, which, a lot of GRC stuff is grunt work, at the end of the day. So that can help a little bit from automation. I'm working on, shameless plug, John Ziola did a AI hackathon the other day, and I worked on Episky, and one of the things I was building into it was getting a vector kind of database along with the control context and what your response is, and then do an AI to actually search your own data and give you context information. So you could ask it specific questions about your controls, about certain stuff. Again, it's not revolutionary, type of thing. Like, it's out there.
Well,
but
I heard
it's,
of a great use case today where somebody was talking about creating their own internal model so that they can keep the data inside their own database, but then make it available so that when their salespeople were responding to RFIs.
It's so funny. That's exactly what I was going to say. No, keep going, though. Yeah.
You finish it because I think we're on the same page.
Yeah. So, like, I've been thinking about this with chatbots forever, right? You have these customer-facing chatbots. It's like, we'll just put one behind, like, a client portal or for RFIs or whatever. But I think of it from, like, if we have customers that are like, hey, tell us about your security program, right? All right, put it behind an authentication portal, right? And just have this chatbot honestly, the earliest use of actual AI that I know is like customer service chatbots.
Yeah. Right.
So leverage that, have it read all your policy documentation, right? All your procedures, all your whatever.
previous responses,
all that stuff. And then just let the vendor assessors type in, okay, how do you do password management? Because, we do password management this way, and here's the excerpt to the policy if you want it, blah, blah, blah. But to your point, in terms of responding to RFIs, I think that's another like almost forward-facing.
Well, this is so that this is to save the security team time.
Yeah.
So that when the salesperson is trying to get the deal, and the questionnaire comes back,
Exactly. Yeah. Same.
they can start to self-serve this, so that they don't just ship the security question over to the security team.
Yeah. Exactly. It's the sales-focused version of the assessment as opposed to the repeat client version of the assessment. But yeah, absolutely.
would you trust the sales team to still with that?
Well, I think you'd have to have checks and balances, of course.
What if it said, we don't do this? And like, nope, that's unacceptable. We're doing it.
I think the challenge that I think about is the danger of like false negatives and
hallucinations.
The hallucinations. Like, how do you do passwords? Oh yeah, we have 300 character passwords or whatever. And it's like, because you know how this works too. It's like, well, we got a response that's clearly untrue or questionable or weird. We can no longer rely on anything we've done for the past 5 years, and we're gonna like just all that kind of chaos that gets generated that typically wouldn't be generated by a human.
Yeah.
But I love the use case. I've actually been thinking about this for a while because we'll help organizations stand up some of their like security response programs in many cases, and we've tinkered with this internally a little bit in terms of like, hey, could this work? Could this work for us? So there is a there, and I think it's super cool, but we haven't gotten wheels under it yet. So yeah, it's neat though.
Did I tell you about my policy mapping thing for a customer?
No.
So I was going for it, and it was a simple exercise. Essentially, they wanted their policy statements mapped to CSF. I was like, let me see what ChatGPT can do and everything. So I upload it, and all of a sudden it's like, this maps to this requirement, this one. I'm like, I'm going to be done in 30 minutes. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah.
And then I start going through and validating, and it was making up requirements numbers. It was just like, that requirement doesn't exist. I don't even know where it got that.
I always think about
all right, back to the old-fashioned way.
Like a couple lawyers that are like effectively facing disbarment or maybe have been disbarred already.
I think that was up in New York and everything. Yeah, it made up a case law.
There are a couple instances of it.
Yeah, that's not.
And you can't. You submit it to the judge without like validating it.
Right, you got to validate what's come out of these things.
Mm-hmm. So, and I do think that's the core takeaway, right? It can accelerate a lot of things in security, but at the heart of it, you still need to do the trust but verify thing. Like you don't just like turn it loose just yet.
Well, that leads me to something else I wanted to know about. A little shift on the topic, but it's deepfakes. And I have not had a chance to figure out how to play with that kind of system yet and make one. Have you seen a good one or tried it?
So I have tried it a little bit, but this was probably about a year and a half ago. So like that stuff's evolving so quickly.
Better.
Yeah, it's probably crazy now. I didn't have great success, although I didn't throw that much time at it. But honestly, the reason I was doing it is because we have a very heavy meme culture where I work. And so we wanted to lightly troll some people. But I couldn't make it work in an hour and a half. And then I was like, okay, that's enough. But I'll tell you, we have used some deep fakes in some of our incident response testing recently, right? So both in terms of pretext, like, hey, I'm gonna, the CEO is on all these calls, so I'm gonna have the CEO call you and say these things that we type in and see if I can
Gotcha. So it
make a thing
mimics his
happen.
tone.
Yeah,
or
mimic
her
the
tone
voice
or whatever.
Yeah. And then the other, and that's been, I think, moderately effective, but sometimes you get some rather hilarious, misses, right? The other thing that we've used it for a little bit, I guess it's less deepfake maliciously, but it's also an incident response, mocking up a newscast, as a for instance, to say like, oh, this company, had this thing happen to them and da-da-da-da, and we're gonna call their person right now for comment, and then we, dial their number, and, because it's all a scripted thing. So to make some of that look and feel a little more real. And those have been pretty good. I've been surprised at the quality that the team has turned out on those things. And I don't think they had to spend a ton of time.
Really? That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm impressed and scared by it.
So let's talk about the defensive side of that.
Yeah.
What should people be considering when deepfakes are a real threat? The folks who know how to use it can really do it, and they can actually make it look like a real video talking to you of the person. They make a request. What should go through the minds of the people getting that request before they go do it?
I mean, nobody's going to trust anybody at that point.
Well, I think we've had this conversation before, but I actually think like we're going to at some point move from like a service-based economy to a trust-based economy, where there's going to be, where the ability to trust swaths of people because they're pre-vetted and stuff like that in specific ways has a ton of value. But to your specific question, I actually think you have to, I don't know that there's a way to solve this without additional process checkpoints when specific things, when specific high risk things happen. So, you want to change a password, right? There's stuff like this that exists that has existed forever. You want to change a password? I'm going to call the cell phone we have on file for you back right now, and I'm not going to change your password unless you pick up, or you can answer these security questions
back
or
to
whatever
the basics. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah.
And the same thing happens. Like how many times a month do we get notes from somebody that says, I want to change my direct deposit. I want to change the ACH for the payments. And it all comes back to the same thing. You've got to set up processes for verification. And they need to be on a different channel, a different method than the one that it came in on.
Yep. And it's proactive and it's reactive, right? So like on the financial side, like there's like the two key solution where like you need multiple people to agree, right? Or I'm going to contact you back on a different channel. And then there's the post occurrence or sometimes the batching process where you do something like positive pay. Like, hey, we're not going to process any of these checks. We're going to batch them all up. And at the end of the day, we're going to do them all at once, right? But we're going to make sure that someone validates them one last time before we actually do them. So I think there's probably a lot of stuff because people have been trying to steal other people's money for a lot longer than they've been trying to do bad things digitally.
Right.
So there's actually a lot of process-oriented controls from the financial teams that I think we'll start to rely on more heavily in the technological world when deepfakes are more and more of a thing.
I had a client last year and everything. They somebody got a handle of like some of their vendors and everything, and sent some fake emails to them saying, "Hey, I'd like to switch my direct deposit over a few weeks," and $500K essentially went out the door to that new bank accounts, and everything. And luckily enough, like I called up my Secret Service buddy, and he was able to like stop 2 of the payments. So it wasn't $500K; they only lost like 100 or something like that, which it's great.
You can get it if you get it early enough.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that was one thing. It's like, and essentially they didn't have a process set up of that. And that's one of the things. I actually just did a call on ACH fraud a couple of weeks ago, and we went through some of the positive pay, approval, like how you validate new users, changing users, and getting a self-service portal, let them basically do it, if you can hook them up to that. If not, have a process where you're vetting, not just trusting an email coming in and stuff like that. And there's a lot of kind of process and technology that goes into some of that stuff.
But I think small businesses are going to be hugely at risk for that stuff because they're the organizations that have, there's only 3 people or there's only one person that does this. So who's the second person that authorizes this thing or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, and there's no natural triggers that when they turn from one person to 3 people, or 3 people to 5 people, or 5 people to 50 people, oftentimes some of those processes just sort of stay the same because they're not necessarily broken. They just haven't realized or hit a thing to improve them. So anyway, I think they're going to be. I think the deepfake stuff is going to, like most things, are going to target small organizations more quickly because they're the most vulnerable in terms of process maturity.
I mean, do they even need to do that stuff and everything?
Deepfakes to target small businesses?
Deepfakes, yeah, exactly. I mean, they usually just fake an email to that, I'm the CEO, transfer this money now. And
I actually think it's not necessarily do they need to. I think it actually turns into once doing that is just as easy based on the tools that are available. Once doing that is just as easy as crafting a spam email to a bunch of people. Well, you might as well do the spam voicemail.
Yeah.
Right? You might as well do it a bunch of ways.
Who leaves a voicemail anymore?
Well, I will tell you as a pretext, if someone's trying to get you to deposit a bunch of money, right, somewhere, if they send you an email and then automatically leave you a voicemail with the right voice and stuff like that, that's going to feel a lot more legitimate.
Or better yet, use a video voicemail.
Right. All sorts of things like that. So I think you can use it to enhance pretexts a lot. I don't think people are going to necessarily go to the trouble just yet. It's still kind of a pain in the butt to build some of these things. But I mean, there's going to be push-button solutions for a lot of this stuff. And I mean, don't quote me, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was 2 years or 5 years.
Yeah. Well, since we're giving advice for small businesses, and we started with, I take this all the way back to the beginning, the NIST Cybersecurity Framework has a small business quick start guide. And it is only a few pages long, and it lays out the complexity of that thing in a very simple, easy to understand way. So if you're a small business and you want to get started, you can just get started with a small business guide, quick start guide.
I'll see about putting that in our show notes and everything, so you can reference that.
Do the CIS one too. I think they have a small business one as well. And again, these things are complementary, right? They have slightly different focuses and they'll cover some of the same ground, but in a different way that I think is useful.
Hey, to round out AI, Microsoft Recall is related to AI. What do you think about Microsoft Recall?
So it was interesting when looking at it. I thought it was more concerning than what it was. Obviously, they're taking screenshots every, few moments, but it's stored locally, which I thought it was uploading, to, the cloud and everything like that. Honestly, I just thought it was like, isn't this Time Machine for the Mac? Like, a lot of times they didn't take screenshots, but they were taking snapshots of all the files and, doing the recall with that. So I don't even know why are you taking screenshots? Like, is there context? I guess you can OCR some information from that, but what's the purpose of it?
Well, the legit purpose is so that you can actually go and search and ask an AI like question, a Copilot, to find out what it is you were looking up that thing, that topic.
But that could be browser history. That could be like the web page itself.
It could all be there. But the bad guy scenario. So it's stored locally, but what do we most worry about? Somebody getting access to your machine because you fell for a phishing attack, and then they can exfiltrate the data.
Right.
And so what does like big technology companies worry about? Well, now they have their secret sauce, their information being snapshotted to all these machines, and now it's not just interactive in wherever they're storing it. The crown jewels have now just moved to
every single endpoint.
That's working.
Yeah, I guess I just don't understand the context of why they would even want the screenshot.
It does. It feels like the risks outweigh the reward. The other sort of risk scenario I thought about with that stuff is if someone got access to this stuff, people are investing a lot of time and money, particularly mature organizations, in user behavior analysis, right? Say, what does normal look like? Well, if I have the screenshots, like over a certain period of time, I know precisely what normal looks like. I know how this specific person works.
How long you've been on ESPN or Facebook or...
Right. So if you have a motivated attacker that ends up with access to some of these things, they could, in theory, get away with a lot more without detection.
It's just like an employer, Big Brother, type of thing.
Oh, well, I guess some of that too. I'm thinking more from the security, the
How
bad
long
guy
has John actually work today, or has he been surfing the internet for?
I will soapbox for another hour on this. I feel passionately that those are not security questions. Those are management questions.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, sure.
And
Absolutely.
they need to be dealt with by management.
Yeah, how many times have you been called when you were in industry, not consulting, to go and grab the snapshot or the history or whatever, even from the system logs, because somebody wants to figure out if their person's working?
This is why it's a specific pain point for
Yes.
me. Oh, yeah.
I experienced that one.
Yeah, it is. You're asking the wrong questions of the wrong people. But anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the Big Brother stuff, yeah, but I do think like it could allow people, that access to that data could allow people to evade UBA more.
Is it just the screenshots or all the rest of the data you're thinking of?
I mean, really all of it collectively, but even just the screenshots could.
Yeah, I was just
Depending
thinking,
on how
like,
frequent- I don't know what the
obviously,
frequency is.
Microsoft got
Every
hit over
couple
the
of
head,
seconds.
and they pulled it back, at least temporarily on some of this stuff to reevaluate it. But I mean, I looked at that outside of the screenshot alone. How long has Apple had Time Machine, where it takes a snapshot of every file and you could go back and look at all that stuff? Like,
That's true.
That's
I do think
like,
the time-
why didn't they get hit over the head? For essentially the same feature.
It's a little bit different. It's more of a backup.
A little bit, yeah, exactly.
I think the difference to me though is, and this might be a very human way of thinking about it, but it doesn't necessarily bother me too much if people know what's happening to my system over time, because the system is the thing under observation. It bothers me a lot more if people know exactly where I was clicking and what I was doing at the time, because I am the one under observation.
yeah.
It's a probably subtle difference, because ultimately if you're looking at all my system files, you kind of know what I'm doing anyway. But it feels like a distinct difference when I analyze it that way. And I bet that's why some of that backlash occurred, because you're taking screenshots of what a person is doing, as opposed to you're taking snapshots of what's happening on a system.
Yeah. And I think, there's always that balance between privacy and value. So you sacrifice a little privacy to get value out of it, So like the Alexas, or something like that. You're sacrificing a little privacy to get value back out of it, type of thing.
It's true, but does that only ever move in one direction? Do you ever sacrifice
I think it's push and
value?
pull, into that.
When do people sacrifice value to get more privacy?
Well, every Alexa or Siri device that's sitting in their house.
No, it's
the other way.
opposite.
The other way.
When does it go the other way? What I see, the reason I ask
Sacrifice value for privacy?
I see this as a slippery slope where
when they throw those devices away.
I suppose. I see it as it's an interesting thing, but it's a slippery slope where, to your point, people will sacrifice a little bit of privacy for some value, and then enough people do that, and then the societal expectation is that everybody's doing that. Everybody has free email from Google. What are you talking about, right? And now all of a sudden, nobody has that privacy anymore. And then what's the next incremental change? And then what's the next incremental change? And I just don't know where or if or how. There's probably several doctorate theses on these, but about how like that gets pulled back at all, right?
Like a societal regression on resetting
it
that?
really feels like it
Honestly,
only
I
moves
think
in
there
one
has to be a
direction.
big impact
I
on
don't know
something.
where it's going to ever pull back.
Yeah.
It's just like this other thing. I just heard somebody rant about, and this is nothing to do with security. It's all about your phone. We have 20 years ago, 30 years ago, would you have ever expected that somebody would message you and almost expect and demand that you're going to
Response like that.
respond within minutes? Because you used to leave the house with no phone and you'd go for however long and you would be away and people would call you and they'd leave a message
Right.
and you may not even return their call.
Absolutely
ever.
right.
And now, if you don't respond to a text in a few minutes, people are going to get irritated with you.
Yeah. People get irritated with me
Especially
so
if
much.
it's your wife.
Yeah, especially
That's true.
that's why she gets a special alert.
Can confirm.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. I think, again, the societal expectations move, and then all of a sudden you're on call all the time. And I suspect it might be related. I don't know this for sure, but and then mental health declines, or there are all these, I think, unintended consequences of always being on call, sacrificing privacy for value, all these things that technology, like at a micro scale, enable in a really positive way, but on a macro scale, are probably worth some consideration. Not that I don't know what you do about it, but
and then you have to be more purposeful of shielding yourself from that.
Right.
You know, like when I first started at the consulting company that we were both a part of, I had to do these big, long reports, 100-page plus, with that. It was the last thing I wanted to do. So any email that came in, anything along that line, I was like, oh, I'll go do that. Like, oh, let me answer that real quick. So I was looking for an excuse not to do this. And I had to eventually reset. And I'm like, all right, I need to carve off. So
You're not disturbed.
I do the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So now I practice inbox zero. I turn off all notifications, except for Slack. I have Slack still on. But like email, I have to physically go into my email to see if I have unread email into that. And I try to get to zero as often as I can. And the ones that are in there are things I have to do, with that. Yeah. So it's waiting on a response. And same with my phone. Like, I try to eliminate, like, okay, nothing is coming up to get me distracted from doing some of that stuff. But
it ends up being like context switching, right? Like, so I'm like, okay, am I in respond to everything mode right now? Or am I in focus on this one thing right now mode or whatever? But again, I get to your point, and it's so true. Like, society in many ways, or many people expect a response on certain modes of communication immediately.
Yeah.
And when they don't get it, there can be consequences. Maybe they're soft consequences, right? Like, well, I just made whatever I wanted for dinner as opposed to asking you your opinion because you weren't around when I needed you, but I assumed I could ask you, while I was at the grocery store. Right? Because that's because that's how it's worked 95% of the time. And I don't know that anyone's necessarily wrong in that scenario, but it has these soft consequences and they build up.
It does, yeah. And so this reminds me of one more thing, still nothing to do with security, but to do with your everyday life of working as a manager or a maker. Alex Hormozi just released a white paper, and he always releases an accompanying video with it too. And he talks you through what happens if you're a manager and how your day is structured and how you fill your day versus if you're a maker and the psychological differences. Whereas a manager, you're successful if every minute of your day is filled with a time block because you are basically being successful when you're in manager mode. You can be both. But when you're, I see where you're going. I see your mind thinking of and when you're in manager mode and a manager is like, I just had 15 meetings today, and in each meeting I got these things accomplished. It was a great day.
That sounds awful.
It does. And if you're but sometimes you have to do those. And so you should focus on what day you're going to do those. And as a maker, your calendar might be blank because that's your opportunity to get things done and figured out. And the minute the manager sees your blank calendar, they figure they can just reach out to you.
Yeah, you're not doing anything.
Or you're not doing anything. Or if I interrupt you, it's not doing anything. And he talks on this, and maybe we should put a link to this too on the show notes. He talks about how to think about this from both sides. So if you're a maker, you understand the manager and what they're trying to do, and then how you can focus your response to actually get your structured day back, your blank calendar, so you can actually make things and work with the managers to understand them as well. And it helps cross the chasm with both sides.
I love that.
I was going to say, I that's one of the things I do as well is I block off my mornings and block off my Fridays for external meetings and everything. So the afternoons, pile it up, But I realize early on that I'm most productive in the morning. So I get up, I can focus on that because you guys know, right now I'm straddling between being a consultant and trying to build a product.
Yep.
And if I let one take over the other, either if I'm building a product that doesn't have a revenue yet, I'm not going to be poor, or if I let consulting take over, which I'm guilty of, I'm not going to get any progress on that either, you know. So
it reminds me of a thing that a very wise mentor said to me a long time ago, and I didn't even recognize the value of it till several years later. He's like, don't underestimate the value of white space. And it's like a design thing to a large extent when you're thinking about, I'm making a a flyer for something or whatever, or an email. Don't, you know, but one of the things he said to me at the time is that applies to scheduling as well.
Right.
Like, oh, wow. Yeah. And now I see it so clearly, right? You need some white space. You need some stuff in the boundaries before things happen and after things happen, because they improve the quality of the thing in the middle so much, or allow for other things to happen in the margins.
Absolutely.
So I really like just that the phrase has always stuck with me, like, don't underestimate the value of white space.
The one calendar app that I started using and everything, I think I talked to you about that. One of the features I have, I don't really use it for it, but you can actually set a limit to say, like, if I don't have at least 10 hours, you know, of outside meeting with that, block the rest off, you know, or something like that.
That's the free Rise calendar.
Yeah, Rise calendar. Yeah,
that's a super cool.
I don't
feature.
use it for that because I block off large swaths already.
You intentionally take your free time.
take that. You know, as in like large blocks with that. But they also do kind of inner syncing, where I have now. With my own email, 3 other clients that I'm on their Outlook with, and you know, they expect to look at your free busy to schedule meetings and everything. And the thing it'll do, like, as soon as one thing goes up on one calendar, it blocks off the other calendar.
Privacy for convenience,
you know, and
I'm
everything.
telling you.
Yeah.
So, well, the nice thing about privacy, it doesn't copy.
No, I know. It's not giving them
it
the
just
details.
says busy.
Yeah,
you know,
no, I know.
You just give Rise access to all of your calendars.
Exactly. Yeah, they have
Right.
access to all the details, but it's making my life easier because then one meeting invite goes up and 3 others
schedule
are blocked,
stuff.
you know, type of thing, which is awesome.
I see the value for sure.
Yeah.
That's cool.
So what do you think?
I think this is great. I think this was great. I think this was great.
Yeah.
I think episode 2 was great.
Yeah.
Hopefully everyone
I think
else
we
thinks
should
episode
keep
2
doing
was
this.
great.
You know?
Cool.
Let's do it
Cheers
again.
and take us out, Justin.
Cheers. Yeah. So thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Please let us know if you want any topics for us to address. We're having fun debating all these and everything. And come back later. Thank you, everyone.